Strip her of her dignity tonight, her uncle said casually, like choosing a dessert. Sara froze. She hadn't been brought here to negotiate. She'd been brought here to disappear. The room smelled of leather and old money. Sara Douglas stood in the center of it, her vibrant striped dress a rebellion she hadn't chosen consciously but wore anyway. The fabric clung to curves the world had taught her to hide, colors that screamed visibility in a life spent perfecting invisibility. Her uncle Sterling stood 3 feet behind her, not close enough to protect, but close enough to claim ownership. His cologne was expensive. His morals were not. "She's all yours," Sterling said, his voice carrying that particular lightness men use when discarding things they never valued. "Consider it compensation for the Douglas family's recent misunderstanding." Compensation. The word landed in Sara's chest like a stone in deep water. Not daughter. Not niece. Not person. Compensation. She had learned the vocabulary of her own disposability early. Too big for the chairs at family dinners. Too much space taken in photographs. Too expensive to clothe, too embarrassing to introduce, too visible to ignore and too easy to blame when business deals went south and someone needed to be the reason. Tonight, her body had made her currency. The Mafia boss had not moved. Atlas Robinson sat in a high-backed chair that looked like a throne made of shadows and old violence. His hands rested on the arms, tattooed fingers still as carved stone. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit that probably cost more than her family's monthly mortgage, and he looked at her uncle the way scientists observe bacteria under glass. Curious. Clinical. Unimpressed. "She's not much to look at," one of Sterling's associates added quickly, nervously, like he was apologizing for a defective product. "But she's obedient. Won't cause trouble. We made sure of that." That was when Sara noticed something strange. These men, powerful men, dangerous men, were explaining themselves. Justifying. People didn't justify themselves to equals. They justified themselves to judges. The room temperature seemed to drop. Atlas Robinson finally lifted his gaze from Sterling to Sara. His eyes were dark, unreadable, the kind of eyes that had witnessed things that would break most people and had simply catalogued the information for future use. Sara had imagined this man 1,000 times in the 3 days since she learned she was being traded. A monster. A brute. A man who would confirm every cruel thing the world had whispered about what happens to women who take up too much space. Instead, his eyes held something that terrified her more than rage ever could. Calculation. Not of her body. Of the cruelty in the room. "Out," Atlas said. The word was quiet. A period, not an exclamation point. Sterling blinked. "I'm sorry. I don't repeat myself, Mr. Douglas." His voice never rose. It didn't need to. It had the weight of absolute certainty behind it, the kind of authority that comes not from shouting but from the knowledge that disobedience has consequences people don't survive. Sterling's face flushed. "Now wait just a..." Atlas Robinson stood. He was tall. Taller than Sara had realized. The kind of height that cast shadows across entire rooms. But it wasn't his height that made Sterling step back. It was the complete, controlled stillness of a man who had killed before and would kill again if the math demanded it. "You have 10 seconds to be outside my door," Atlas said. "Or you'll leave in a condition that requires considerably more assistance." They were gone in 7. The heavy door shut. The lock clicked with a finality that sounded like a coffin closing. Sara stood alone with the man who now owned her. Her heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her throat, her wrists, behind her eyes. This was the moment. The moment they'd all promised her. The punishment for being born wrong, for taking up space, for failing to shrink herself small enough to be acceptable. Atlas Robinson walked toward her. Each step was measured, controlled. He moved like violence in a well-cut suit, like elegance wrapped around something ancient and unforgiving. Sara's hands trembled. She locked her knees to keep from collapsing. He stopped 3 feet away. Close enough that she could see the intricate detail of the tattoos winding up his neck, disappearing beneath his collar. Each line was precise, deliberate. Art made from pain. "What did they tell you I would do to you?" he asked. His voice was different now. Quieter. Not soft, but no longer performing for an audience. Sara's throat closed. She forced words past the fear. "They didn't tell me. They just implied I wouldn't survive the night as myself. And you believed them." It wasn't a question. "Yes," she whispered. "Why?" The question startled her. Because people like you don't." "People like me," he repeated, something bitter crossing his expression. "And what am I like?" Sara's mouth opened. Closed. Every answer felt like a trap. "They said you were cruel," she finally managed. "That you break people who cross you." "I do," he said simply. "But you haven't crossed me, Sara Douglas." The sound of her name in his mouth shocked her. He knew it. He'd learned it. She wasn't just the fat girl or compensation or any of the other shorthand her family used to avoid acknowledging her humanity. "Then what am I here for?" she asked, and was surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Atlas Robinson tilted his head slightly, studying her like she was a puzzle he hadn't expected to find interesting. "You're here because your family are cowards," he said. "Because they embezzled from me, got caught, and decided you were cheaper than money. Because they genuinely believe I would hurt you to punish them." Each word landed like a physical blow. Sara felt something crack open in her chest. Not surprise. She'd known, on some level, that her family saw her as disposable. But hearing it stated so plainly, by a stranger, made it real in a way that years of subtle cruelty never had. "I'm sorry," she heard herself say. His eyes narrowed. "For what?" "For being the reason you were disrespected. For being what they sent instead of." "Stop." The command cut through her automatic apology. "Look at me, Sara." She did. She had no choice. His presence demanded it. "You are not the insult," Atlas Robinson said, each word deliberate. "The insult is that they thought I was the kind of man who would hurt someone to make cowards feel powerful. The insult is that they spent years convincing you that your existence requires an apology." Sara stared at him, her mind trying to reorganize reality around what he was saying. "You're not going to hurt me," she said slowly, testing the words. "No." "Why not?" For the first time, something that might have been humor flickered across his expression. "Because I'm not interested in becoming the monster your family needs me to be to justify what they've done." He stepped back, giving her space she hadn't realized she needed. "You'll stay here," he continued. "You'll be treated with respect by everyone in this house. And in return, you'll help me understand exactly how deeply the rot runs in the Douglas family finances." Sara's breath caught. "You want me to betray them?" Atlas finished. "No. I want you to stop protecting people who used you as a shield." He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at her. "Your family sent you here to be erased, Sara Douglas. But I only see the one person in this room who isn't a coward. The door opened. He gestured toward it. Maria will show you to your room. You're safe here. Tomorrow, we begin burning down the empire that tried to bury you. Atlas Robinson left. Sara stood alone in the room that smelled of leather and old money, her hands still trembling, but for a different reason now. For the first time in her life, someone had looked at her and seen a weapon instead of a burden. And somewhere deep in her chest, buried under years of forced smallness, something that felt dangerously like power began to wake up. If you believe no one deserves to be judged by their body, drop a comment with where you're watching from. Let's build a community that sees people, not sizes. Sara couldn't stop shaking. The woman who had appeared at the door, Maria, was older, kind-faced, with silver threading through her dark hair. She had guided Sara through hallways that seemed to stretch forever, past rooms filled with furniture that probably cost more than Sara's entire childhood, up a staircase with railings carved from what looked like genuine mahogany. The bedroom they'd given her was larger than her apartment back home. A four-poster bed dominated the space, dressed in linens so white they almost glowed. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked gardens she could barely see in the darkness. Everything was beautiful, careful, expensive. It felt like a trap. Maria had left her with a quiet goodnight and instructions that breakfast would be ready whenever Sara woke. No schedule. No demands. Just an open invitation that felt more threatening than any order ever had. Sara sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her striped dress, and finally let herself fall apart. The sobs came in waves, violent and silent. She pressed her hands over her mouth to muffle the sound, old habits dying hard. Crying loudly had always brought consequences. Attention. Mockery. The reminder that even her pain took up too much space. She didn't hear the door open. Sara. Her head snapped up. Atlas Robinson stood in the doorway, still wearing that perfect black suit, his expression unreadable in the low light. Panic shot through her. She tried to stand, to explain, to apologize for crying when she should be grateful, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. He crossed the room in 4 long strides. Before she could process what was happening, he knelt in front of her. Actually knelt, bringing himself below her eye level, his hands reaching up to frame her face just like he had downstairs. His palms were warm. His touch was impossibly gentle for hands covered in tattoos that probably represented a dozen different ways he'd ended lives. "Look at me," he said, and his voice was softer than she'd heard it yet. Not weak. Just human. Sara looked. She had no choice. His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. "They told you that you failed," Atlas said. "That you were useless. That being sent to me was punishment for existing wrong." It wasn't a question, but Sara nodded anyway, tears still streaming down her face. "They lied," he said simply. "You didn't fail. You survived. There's a difference." "I'm not strong," Sara whispered. "I couldn't even fight them. I just let them bring me here. I just let them give me away like I was nothing." "You're standing in the house of the most dangerous man in this city," Atlas said, "and you're telling me the truth about how you feel. That's not weakness, Sara. That's more courage than any of those cowards downstairs will ever have." His thumbs brushed away tears from her cheeks, the gesture so tender it made her chest ache. "I don't destroy people to make cowards feel powerful," he continued. "I don't break innocent women because guilty men decided they were currency. And I sure as hell don't punish someone for having the audacity to exist in a body the world decided wasn't acceptable." Sara's breath hitched. "Then what do you want from me?" Something shifted in his expression. Almost a smile, but sadder. I want you to stop apologizing for taking up space, he said. I want you to eat breakfast tomorrow without calculating whether you've earned it. I want you to walk through this house like you belong here, because you do. Why? The word came out broken. Why are you being kind to me? Atlas Robinson held her gaze for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old wounds that had never properly healed. Because someone should have been kind to you a long time ago, he said. And because the world has enough cruelty in it. I don't need to add more. He released her face slowly, stood, and walked to the door. Before leaving, he looked back. Sleep, Sara Douglas. Tomorrow, we start teaching you how to stop being invisible. The door closed with a soft click. Sara sat in the beautiful room, her face still warm from his touch, and for the first time in years, she believed that maybe surviving was enough. Sara woke to sunlight streaming through windows she'd forgotten to close. For a disorienting moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then reality crashed back. The Mafia boss. The trade. The impossible gentleness of tattooed hands holding her face while she cried. She sat up slowly, half expecting someone to burst through the door with new rules, new punishments, proof that last night had been an elaborate setup for something worse. Nothing happened. The house was quiet except for birdsong filtering through the glass. Sara found a bathroom attached to her room, all marble and gold fixtures that looked like they belonged in a museum. Someone had left fresh towels, toiletries still in their packaging, a robe softer than anything she'd ever owned. She showered quickly, unable to shake the feeling that using the hot water too long would trigger consequences. When she finally ventured downstairs, following the scent of coffee and the vague memory of last night's rout, she found Maria in a kitchen that could have served a restaurant. "Good morning, Miss Sara," Maria said, smiling like Sara's presence was expected. "Wanted, even. What would you like for breakfast?" Sara froze. "I don't want to be trouble." "You're not trouble. You're hungry. There's a difference." Maria gestured to a table already set with fresh fruit, pastries, and what looked like homemade preserves. "Sit. Eat. I'll make you eggs if you'd like. Or pancakes. Atlas mentioned you might prefer something warm." He'd mentioned her. He'd thought about what she might want. Sara sat carefully, taking only a small pastry, hyper-aware of every bite. Waiting for someone to comment. To count calories out loud. To remind her that girls who looked like her shouldn't eat carbs before noon. No one said anything. After breakfast, Maria offered to show her the house. "You're free to go anywhere," she said. Atlas was very clear about that. They walked through rooms that felt like museum exhibits. A formal dining room with a table that could seat 20. A sitting room with furniture that looked antique and probably was. Hallways lined with art Sara recognized from textbooks but had never seen in person. Every room felt like a test. Like someone was waiting for her to touch something she shouldn't, to break something valuable, to prove she didn't belong in spaces this beautiful. But Maria just walked and talked, pointing out details with genuine warmth, never once suggesting Sara needed supervision. Then they reached the library. Sara stopped breathing. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined 3 walls, packed with books in leather bindings, paperback spines, everything from classics to contemporary releases. A ladder on rails gave access to the higher shelves. 2 reading chairs sat by a window that overlooked the gardens, a small table between them already stacked with bookmarks and a reading lamp. "Atlas doesn't use it much," Maria said softly. "But he maintains it. Says a house without books is just a building. Sara took a hesitant step inside. The smell of paper and binding glue wrapped around her like a blanket. She'd lived in libraries growing up. They were the only places where taking up space reading for hours was encouraged instead of criticized. "Can I?" Sara started, then stopped. "Am I allowed to?" "Miss Sara," Maria said gently, "this is your home now. You don't need permission to exist in it." Sara moved to the nearest shelf, fingers trailing over spines. Philosophy. History. Fiction she'd been meaning to read for years. A collection of poetry that looked well loved, pages soft from repeated reading. She pulled out a novel, held it like something precious, and waited for someone to tell her to put it back. No one did. Maria had quietly left, closing the door to give her privacy. Sara sank into one of the reading chairs, the book open in her lap, and felt something dangerous unfurl in her chest. Not hope, exactly. Not yet. But the beginning of belief that maybe this wasn't a cage at all. That maybe Atlas Robinson had meant what he said. That maybe, for the first time in her life, she was allowed to simply be. She stayed in the library until the sun shifted across the floor, reading without interruption, and slowly, page by page, started to remember what peace felt like. Sara found Atlas in what Maria called the study, though it looked more like a war room. 3 days had passed since she'd arrived. 3 days of waiting for the trap to spring, for the kindness to curdle into cruelty. 3 days of nothing but peace, books, and meals where no one commented on what or how much she ate. It was starting to make her nervous. He sat behind a massive desk, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, reading through documents with the focused intensity of someone cataloging evidence. The afternoon light caught the tattoos winding up his forearms, making the ink seem alive. Sara had noticed them that first night. Had seen them again yesterday when he'd joined her for dinner, asking about the book she was reading like her opinion actually mattered. But she'd never asked. Never felt entitled to his story. Today, standing in the doorway watching him work, the question slipped out before she could stop it. "What do they mean?" Atlas looked up, unstarred by her presence. "The tattoos?" Sara nodded, already regretting speaking. "I'm sorry. That's personal. I shouldn't have." "Come here," he said, setting down the document. She approached slowly, stopping at the edge of the desk. He stood, walked around it, and held out his right arm. "Each one is a name," he said quietly. "Someone I couldn't save." Sara's breath caught. Up close, she could see the details. Dates woven into designs. Initials hidden in flourishes. The elaborate artwork wasn't decoration. It was a memorial. This one, Atlas traced a line of script along his inner forearm, was my sister. Elena. She was 16 when my father's enemies decided the best way to hurt him was through his children. I was 19. I thought I could protect her. His voice didn't waver, but Sara saw his jaw tighten. This one, he indicated a compass rose on his wrist, was my first driver. Caught a bullet meant for me. He had 3 kids. They were 8, 6, and 4. Sara felt tears prick her eyes. Atlas, I. This one was a bartender who saw too much. This one was a lawyer who tried to do the right thing. This one was a kid, 14, who got caught in crossfire during a deal gone bad. His finger moved from mark to mark, each one a story of violence, of failed protection, of guilt carried in ink. I have 37 names on my body, Sara. 37 people I couldn't keep safe. That's not your fault, Sara whispered. Isn't it? He looked at her directly, and for the first time she saw past the controlled exterior to the raw wound underneath. I'm the one who stayed in this life. I'm the one who didn't walk away when I had the chance. Every person who dies because of proximity to me is a choice I made. Sara reached out without thinking, her fingers hovering over a rose design that wrapped around his forearm. May I? He nodded. She touched the ink gently, tracing the petals. His skin was warm under her fingertips. Human. You carry them with you, she said softly. That's not indifference. That's love. It's guilt. It can be both. Atlas was quiet for a long moment, watching her trace the names of his dead. I saw your uncle yesterday, he finally said. He came asking about you. Wanted to know if I'd disposed of his problem yet. Sara's hand stilled. What did you tell him? I told him that you weren't his problem. You were his failure. And that the only thing I was disposing of was his access to the money he stole from me. Sara looked up at him. He'll come back. He'll try to hurt you for protecting me. Let him try. Atlas covered her hand with his, pressing her palm flat against the names written on his skin. I have 37 people on my body, Sara. 37 names I carry every day. I refuse to add yours to that list. Why? The question came out broken. Why does it matter if I survive? He stepped closer, his free hand lifting to cup her face the way he had that first night. The gesture was becoming familiar. Grounding. Because you deserve to be more than a cautionary tale, he said. Because every person I couldn't save would want me to save someone. And because when I look at you, I don't see a burden. I see someone who survived people who should have protected her. Tears spilled down Sara's cheeks. I'm not strong enough to be worth this. You're standing here asking about my dead, Atlas said gently. You're touching my scars without flinching. You're the first person in 5 years to see these tattoos as grief instead of decoration. That's strength, Sara. That's exactly the kind of strength that survives. He released her slowly, stepping back. Now go eat lunch. Maria made that soup you liked. And tonight, if you want, I'll tell you about Elena. She would have liked you. Sara left the study with her hand still warm from his skin, carrying the weight of 37 names that weren't hers, and the impossible knowledge that Atlas Robinson had decided she was worth saving. Sara had been reaching for a water glass when her elbow caught the edge of the serving tray. Time seemed to slow as the antique teapot tilted, wobbled, then crashed to the marble floor in an explosion of porcelain and centuries-old craftsmanship. The sound echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot. Maria froze mid-sentence. The younger cook, Thomas, stopped chopping vegetables. Even the kitchen itself seemed to hold its breath. Sara stared at the shattered pieces scattered across the floor. Blue and white fragments that had probably been in Atlas's family for generations. Irreplaceable. Priceless. Gone because she'd been careless. Because she took up too much space. Because she dared to reach for something in a kitchen that wasn't really hers. Her body knew what came next before her mind caught up. The hitting. The screaming. The itemized list of her failures, of how much she cost, of why this proved she couldn't be trusted with nice things. Sara dropped to her knees, hands shaking as she tried to gather the pieces. A sharp edge sliced her palm. Blood welled up, mixing with the dust of destroyed porcelain. I'm sorry, she whispered, frantic. I'm so sorry. I'll pay for it. I'll work it off. I'll. Miss Sara, stop. Maria's voice was gentle but firm. You're bleeding. I have to fix it. I have to. Sara. Atlas's voice cut through her panic like a blade. She looked up to find him standing in the kitchen doorway, still wearing his suit from whatever meeting he'd just left. His eyes moved from her face to her bleeding hand to the shattered teapot on the floor. Sara felt her chest constrict. This was it. The moment the kindness ended. The moment she proved everyone right about what a burden she was. I'm sorry, she said again, hating how small her voice sounded. I know it was expensive. I know I should have been more careful. I'll find a way to replace it. I promise I'll. Stand up. It wasn't a request. Sara stood on shaking legs, blood dripping from her palm onto the marble. She couldn't look at him. Couldn't bear to see the disappointment, the anger, the confirmation that she'd finally crossed the line. Atlas crossed the room in 3 strides. His hand caught her wrist, gentle despite the authority in his grip, turning her palm up to examine the cut. Maria, first aid kit, he said calmly. Thomas, clean up the porcelain. Carefully. I don't want anyone else getting hurt. Sir, Thomas started, that teapot was from your grandmother's collection. It's been in your family since. I know what it was, Atlas interrupted, his eyes still on Sara's hand. And I know exactly how much it's worth. Sara braced herself. It's worth nothing compared to her safety. The words didn't make sense. Sara's brain tried to rearrange them into something logical, something that matched the reality she knew. Atlas took the first aid kit from Maria and guided Sara to a chair. He knelt in front of her, just like he had that first night, and began cleaning the cut with a gentleness that made her chest ache. It was an accident, he said, not looking up from his work. Accidents happen. Porcelain can be replaced. You can't. But it was your grandmother's, Sara whispered. It was important. My grandmother, Atlas said, wrapping gauze around her palm, would have thrown that teapot at someone's head if she thought it would protect a person who needed it. She didn't tolerate cruelty, and she sure as hell didn't value objects over people. He secured the bandage and finally looked up at her. Listen to me, Sara. You're bleeding because you tried to clean up broken porcelain with your bare hands. You're shaking because you expected me to hurt you over a teapot. Do you understand how wrong that is? I broke something that mattered to you, she said. You matter to me, he corrected. The teapot was just a thing. Things break. That's what they do. But I will not have you believing that your value is less than china. Sara felt tears spill over. Everyone else was wrong, Atlas said firmly. Your family was wrong. Every person who made you feel like taking up space was a crime was wrong. And if you breaking every piece of porcelain in this house is what it takes for you to stop flinching every time you reach for something, then I'll hand you a hammer and we'll start in the dining room. A laugh burst out of Sara, watery and shocked. You can't mean that. I absolutely mean that. He stood, helping her to her feet. Now go sit in the library while Maria finishes lunch. And Sara? She looked at him, still not quite believing. Next time something breaks, tell me. Don't bleed trying to fix it alone. That's what you have people for now. If this story is touching your heart, show it with a like. And subscribe so you never miss stories that challenge how we see beauty and worth. Madame Vane arrived in a Mercedes and an attitude that could cut glass. She swept into the sitting room with 2 assistants trailing behind her, carrying what looked like half a boutique's worth of fabric samples. Her eyes scanned the space with the practiced assessment of someone who appraised people the way jewelers appraised stones. When her gaze landed on Sara, something cold flickered across her expression. This is the client, she asked Atlas, her French accent thick with disbelief. Sara felt herself shrink into the chair. She'd known this was coming. Atlas had insisted she needed proper clothes, had called in the city's most exclusive designer despite Sara's protests that she could just order things online. Now she understood why she'd tried to avoid this. Sara Douglas, Atlas said from where he stood by the window. She needs a complete wardrobe. Evening wear, casual pieces, everything. Madame Vane circled Sara like a hawk circling prey. I see. Well, I do have some clients who are, shall we say, more generously proportioned. I can work with this. The way she said this made Sara's skin crawl. However, Madame Vane continued, pulling out her measuring tape with the enthusiasm of someone preparing for surgery, we must be realistic about what styles are appropriate. Certain cuts simply don't work on bodies that are, well. We'll focus on dark colors. Vertical lines. Anything to minimize the? Stop talking. Atlas's voice was quiet. Deadly quiet. Madame Vane paused mid-gesture. Excuse me? I said stop talking. He moved from the window, and suddenly the room felt smaller. You're standing in my home, speaking about someone under my protection, and you're doing it as if she isn't in the room. Mr. Robinson, I'm simply being honest about. You're being cruel, he interrupted. And calling it honesty doesn't make it acceptable. Sara's heart hammered. She wanted to tell him it was fine, that she was used to it, that Madame Vane was just saying what everyone thought anyway. But the words stuck in her throat. Madame Vane drew herself up. I have dressed royalty, Mr. Robinson. Celebrities. I know what works on the female form. If you want this girl to look presentable, then certain realities must be acknowledged. The only reality that needs acknowledging, Atlas said, stepping closer to Sara's chair, is that you're fired. The designer's face went pale. You can't be serious. I'm booked months in advance. People wait years for my designs. Then they can keep waiting. He pulled out his phone. Maria, please escort Madame Vane and her staff out. Immediately. Mr. Robinson, Madame Vane's voice took on a desperate edge, I apologize if I offended. I was simply trying to provide professional guidance. Surely you understand that certain bodies require special consideration. Atlas looked at her like she was something he'd found on his shoe. Sara's body doesn't require special consideration. It requires respect. Something you're clearly incapable of providing. But her size? Her size is none of your concern, he said flatly. Her comfort is. Her confidence is. Making her feel beautiful is. You failed at all three within 5 minutes of walking through my door. Maria appeared with 2 security guards. Madame Vane stared at them, then at Atlas, realization dawning that he was serious. You'll regret this, she said coldly. When she looks ridiculous in whatever bargain designer you find, don't come crawling back to me. Get out, Atlas said. Before I have you removed less politely. They left in a flurry of expensive perfume and muttered French curses. The door closed. Silence filled the sitting room. Sara sat frozen, afraid to move, afraid to believe what had just happened. Men didn't defend her. They certainly didn't fire prestigious designers over her. Atlas knelt in front of her chair, the position he always took when he needed her to really hear him. Look at me, he said gently. She did, tears already blurring her vision. There is nothing wrong with your body, he said, each word deliberate. Nothing that needs minimizing or hiding or apologizing for. And anyone who suggests otherwise doesn't belong in your life. Do you understand? She was right though, Sara whispered. Certain things don't look good on people like me. People like you, Atlas repeated, something dangerous in his tone. You mean people who are beautiful? Who take up space unapologetically? Who deserve to wear whatever makes them feel powerful? Atlas. In this house, he interrupted, you are the standard, Sara. Not some arbitrary size chart. Not whatever poisonous nonsense the fashion industry decided was acceptable. You. Exactly as you are. He stood, pulling out his phone again. I'm calling Elena's designer. The one who made her prom dress. She told me once that beauty isn't about fitting clothes, it's about making clothes fit you. Sara wiped her eyes. You don't have to do this. I know I don't have to, Atlas said, already dialing. I want to. There's a difference. He paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression that was almost a smile. And Sara? Next time someone tries to make you feel small, don't wait for me to defend you. You have my full permission to tell them exactly where they can put their opinions. Sara hadn't meant to eavesdrop. She'd been looking for Atlas, wanted to thank him for what he'd done with Madame Vane, when she heard voices coming from his office. The door was slightly ajar, light spilling into the hallway. She recognized her Uncle Sterling's voice immediately. I'm just checking in, Sterling was saying, that false joviality he used when he wanted something. Making sure our arrangement is proceeding smoothly. Your arrangement, Atlas said, his tone flat and cold, was a debt settlement. Nothing more. Right. Of course. Sterling laughed nervously. I just wanted to make sure the, disposal was handled discreetly. No complications. Sara's blood turned to ice. Disposal, Atlas repeated. Well, yes. That was the agreement, wasn't it? We pay the original debt plus the extra 50,000, and you make sure Sara isn't a problem anymore. The world tilted sideways. Sara gripped the doorframe, her legs suddenly unreliable. Extra 50,000. They hadn't just traded her to settle a debt. They'd paid Atlas extra money to kill her. You paid me to murder your niece, Atlas said, and there was something terrifying in his voice. Something that promised violence. Don't be so dramatic, Sterling scoffed. She's not really family. My brother married her mother, that's all. The girl's been nothing but dead weight her whole life. Eating us out of house and home, embarrassing us at every function. We couldn't just kick her out, people would talk. But this way, with the debt and everything, it seemed like a clean solution. A clean solution, Atlas echoed. You mean murder? I mean a business transaction, Sterling corrected. You needed payment. We needed a problem solved. Everyone wins. Except Sara. Well, yes, obviously except Sara. But honestly, we'd be doing her a favor. It's not like she has much of a life anyway. No friends, no prospects, no one who'd miss her. At least this way she'd be useful for once. Sara couldn't breathe. The hallway swam in and out of focus. Every kind word Sterling had ever spoken, every family dinner where they'd tolerated her presence, every time they'd called her part of the family had been a lie. They'd been planning this. Waiting for an opportunity to get rid of her permanently. Let me make something very clear, Atlas said, his voice dropping to a register Sara had never heard before. I don't kill innocent people to make guilty ones comfortable. I never did. That was your assumption. What? Sterling's confusion was palpable. But you took her. You accepted the deal. I took her away from you, Atlas corrected. There's a difference. Sara is alive, healthy, and currently living in this house as my guest. Not my victim. The silence that followed was deafening. You can't be serious, Sterling finally sputtered. We paid you $50,000 to reveal exactly what kind of monsters you are, Atlas finished. Consider it money well spent on a character reference. She's my niece. You can't just keep her. She's not property, Sterling. She's a person. And she's free to leave any time she wants. Something you never offered her. Sara heard footsteps. Sterling moving toward the door. She should hide, should run, but her body wouldn't cooperate. The door swung open. Sterling froze when he saw her standing there, her face wet with tears, her hands clenched into fists. Sara, he started, you have to understand, it was nothing personal. Get out, she said. Her voice didn't sound like her own. It sounded cold. Empty. Like something inside her had finally, irrevocably broken. Now wait just a minute. I said get out. The scream tore out of her throat, raw and primal. You paid someone to kill me. You looked me in the eye for weeks knowing you were sending me to die. Get out before I forget that murder is wrong. Atlas appeared in the doorway, his presence filling the space. You hurt her. Sterling looked between them, realization dawning that he'd lost control of the situation. This isn't over. She's family. We have rights. You have nothing, Atlas said quietly. And if you come near her again, you'll discover exactly how creative I can be with debt collection. Sterling fled down the hallway like the coward he was. Sara stood frozen, her entire body shaking with a rage she'd never allowed herself to feel before. Not sadness. Not hurt. Pure, crystalline fury. Atlas stepped closer, careful, like approaching something wild. How long have you known? She asked. Since the beginning. The moment he said compensation, I knew something was wrong. People don't pay extra for compensation. And you didn't tell me. I was going to. Tonight. I wanted you to feel safe first. He paused. I'm sorry you found out this way. Sara looked at him, this dangerous man who'd shown her more humanity in 2 weeks than her family had in her entire life. Teach me, she said. Teach you what? How to destroy them. Her voice was steady now. Cold. You said I could help you burn down the empire that tried to bury me. I'm ready to light the match. Atlas studied her face for a long moment. Then slowly, deliberately, he smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator recognizing another predator. Tomorrow morning, he said. We start with their financial records. By the time we're done, the Douglas family will wish they'd just paid the original debt. The war room, as Sara had started calling it, was lined with screens and filing cabinets that probably contained enough evidence to put half the city behind bars. Atlas spread 3 ledgers across the massive table, each one thick with entries in different handwriting, different codes, different years of carefully documented crime. This is how empires fall, he said, tapping the nearest book. Not with bullets. With numbers. Money leaves trails that bodies don't. Sara pulled her chair closer, her anger from yesterday still simmering beneath her skin. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying Sterling's words on an endless loop. Dead weight. Problem solved. No one would miss her. She'd show them what a problem actually looked like. The syndicate runs on 3 pillars, Atlas continued. Smuggling, money laundering, and protection rackets. Your family's construction company was washing money through fake contracts. But they got greedy. Started skimming off the top. He opened the first ledger to a page marked with a red tab. This is the official record. Clean, organized, every transaction accounted for. Then he opened the second ledger to the same date range. This is the real record. Notice anything? Sara leaned forward, her eyes scanning the columns. Numbers that should match didn't. Dates were off by days. Supplier names were spelled differently. They're moving more than they're reporting, she said slowly. Exactly. They pocket the difference and hope no one notices. Atlas pulled out the third ledger. This is the syndicate's master record. What they think is happening. Sara looked between all three books, her mind starting to map the connections. But if the syndicate thinks they're getting X amount, and the real amount is Y, that means someone's stealing from everyone, Atlas finished. And blaming market fluctuations. Sara's fingers moved across the pages, following numbers like breadcrumbs. Something was nagging at her, a pattern she couldn't quite see yet. Can I have paper? She asked. Atlas slid a legal pad and pen across the table. Sara started writing. Not the transactions themselves, but the gaps between them. The 3-day delay between shipment and receipt. The way certain supplier codes only appeared on Tuesdays. The invoices that were always multiples of 7,000. What are you doing? Atlas asked, watching her work. Looking for the rhythm, she said absently, her pen moving faster. Everything has a rhythm. People are creatures of habit, even criminals. If I can find the pattern, I can find the... She stopped. Stared at her notes. Oh, she breathed. Oh, that's clever. Atlas moved to stand behind her chair. What did you find? They're not smuggling continuously, Sara said, excitement creeping into her voice despite the anger still coiled in her chest. They're using a rotation. 3 routes, 7-day cycles, but they stagger them so it looks random. Port shipments on days 1 and 8, truck routes on days 3 and 10, air freight on days 5 and 12. She flipped back through the ledger, checking her theory. But here, look. Week 17. The truck route shows up on day 4 instead of day 3. That's not a mistake. That's someone else using the route while the regular shipment is delayed. Atlas leaned closer, his eyes scanning the page. They're selling access to the smuggling routes. Not just access. Time slots. Sara was fully engaged now, the part of her brain that had always found sanctuary in patterns and logic finally given something worthy of its attention. They're running a secondary operation inside the primary one. Charging other criminals to piggyback on established routes. Which means double revenue that never gets reported to the syndicate. And triple exposure if anyone gets caught. Sara looked up at Atlas. These routes aren't just skimming. They're entire shadow networks. If the syndicate knew, they'd execute everyone involved, Atlas finished. Starting with the Douglas family. Sara felt that cold satisfaction bloom in her chest again. How many families are doing this? Atlas pulled out another ledger. That's what we're going to find out. And you're going to be the one to map it. They worked through the afternoon and into the evening, Sara finding cracks in systems that Atlas admitted he'd never noticed. She had a gift for it, he told her. The ability to see absences as clearly as presences. To find the negative space where crime was happening in the margins. By midnight, Sara had documented 17 separate shadow routes across 5 families, including her own. This is enough to collapse the entire Western Seaboard operation, Atlas said quietly, looking at her work spread across the table. Sara stared at the evidence, at the proof of corruption so deep it had its own ecosystem. Her family was just one small part of it. But they were the part that had tried to kill her. "When do we move?" she asked. Atlas studied her face. "You understand what this means? Once we expose this, people will die. Maybe not by our hands, but by the syndicates. Your family included." "They paid you to kill me," Sara said simply. "Consider this self-defense in slow motion." Something like respect crossed Atlas's expression. "You're sure?" Sara thought about a lifetime of being called deadweight. Of being traded like livestock. Of $50,000 spent to erase her from existence. "I'm sure," she said. "Let's show them what happens when deadweight learns to pull its own trigger." Atlas smiled, sharp and dangerous. "Then tomorrow, we plan the gala." The ballroom glittered with the kind of wealth that came from blood and broken laws. Sara stood at the top of the grand staircase, her hand resting lightly on Atlas's arm, and watched the syndicate's elite mingle below. Crime lords in tuxedos. Money launderers in evening gowns. Her family scattered among them like rot in expensive packaging. She wore midnight blue, a gown that the new designer had created specifically for her body. Not to minimize or hide, but to celebrate. The fabric moved like water, and for the first time in her life, Sara felt beautiful not despite her size but because she'd stopped apologizing for it. Sterling spotted her first. His champagne glass froze halfway to his mouth. "Ladies and gentlemen," Atlas's voice cut through the conversation like a blade through silk. The room fell silent. "Thank you for accepting my invitation tonight. I know many of you were surprised by the sudden gathering." Sara felt her heartbeat steady. This was it. The moment she'd spent 3 weeks preparing for. "I've called you here," Atlas continued, descending the stairs with Sara at his side, "because we have a problem. A problem of trust." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sara's mother stood near the back, her face pale. Her aunt pretended not to see her. Sterling's expression cycled through confusion, fear, and finally fury as Atlas led Sara directly to the center of the ballroom. "Some of you have been operating shadow routes," Atlas said calmly. "Selling access to syndicate infrastructure for personal profit. Skimming millions from our collective operations." The room erupted. Denials. Accusations. The sound of powerful people suddenly afraid. Atlas raised his hand. Silence fell again. "I have proof," he said simply. "Dates. Routes. Transactions. Everything." He paused, letting that sink in. "But I'm not the one who found it." He turned to Sara. Every eye in the room fixed on her. The fat girl they'd mocked at family dinners. The burden. The problem. The thing Sterling had paid $50,000 to erase. "Miss Douglas," Atlas said formally, "would you care to explain?" Sara stepped forward. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't waver. "For the past 3 weeks," she said, "I've been analyzing financial records. Mapping smuggling routes. Tracking money flows through shell companies and offshore accounts." She pulled a slim tablet from her clutch. "I found 17 shadow operations. Totaling $347 million in unreported revenue." Sterling pushed through the crowd. "This is absurd. She's lying." "She's just some." "Some what, Uncle Sterling?" Sara interrupted, her voice cutting. "Some fat girl who couldn't possibly be smart enough to find what you've been hiding?" She tapped the tablet. On the massive screen behind her, financial records appeared. route maps, transaction histories. All of it damning. The Douglas Construction Company alone, Sara continued, has been running shadow routes for 4 years. You've skimmed $82 million. You've sold syndicate access to competitors. You've endangered every operation in this room for personal profit. Her mother made a sound like a wounded animal. Sara, please. Please what, mother? Sara's eyes were cold. Please forget that you watched Sterling trade me away? Please ignore that you paid Atlas $50,000 extra to kill me? Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Heads turned toward Sterling, whose face had gone from red to gray. We didn't, he stammered. You did, Atlas said quietly. I have the wire transfer. Dated 3 days before you delivered Sara to my door. Memo line said disposal fee. The Syndicate Council, 4 men and 1 woman who controlled the entire Eastern operations, stepped forward. Their faces were carved from stone. Is this true, Douglas? The woman asked, her voice deadly calm. Sterling looked around wildly for support. Found none. She was worthless. She was dead weight. We were doing everyone a favor. By stealing from us, the woman continued. By compromising our routes? By paying for a murder that would have brought federal attention? Sterling's voice broke. We were going to pay it back. You were going to pay back $300 million? Sara asked. How? Because as of 3 hours ago, every account your family controls has been frozen and rerouted. The color drained from Sterling's face. What? Sara felt that cold satisfaction bloom fully in her chest. Every dollar you stole. Every hidden account. Every shell company. I found them all. And Atlas and I spent the last 72 hours moving that money somewhere you'll never reach it. You can't do that. Sterling lunged forward. Atlas moved faster, his hand catching Sterling's throat. She can, Atlas said softly. And she did. Consider it compensation for trying to buy her murder. He released Sterling, who stumbled backward into the council's waiting hands. Sara looked at her mother, her aunt, the cousins who'd made her life hell. You wanted me to disappear. Congratulations. The old Sara is gone. But she took your empire with her. The council leader studied Sara with something like respect. What do you want done with the money, Miss Douglas? Sara glanced at Atlas. He nodded slightly. Return what was stolen from the syndicate, she said. The rest gets divided among the families they endangered. Every route operator whose cover they nearly blew. Every person who risked their life while my family got rich selling them out. She turned toward the exit, Atlas falling into step beside her. Oh, and Uncle Sterling, she called back. That $50,000 you spent trying to kill me? I'm donating it to a women's shelter. In your name. Consider it a down payment on your karma. They left through the front doors, leaving chaos and the ruin of the Douglas Empire behind them. Outside, Sara took her first full breath in what felt like years. How do you feel? Atlas asked quietly. Sara considered the question. Like I finally weigh exactly what I'm worth. The estate was quiet in a way Sara had never heard it before. Atlas had spent the week after the gala dismantling his empire piece by piece. Settling debts. Transferring operations to people he trusted. Converting blood money into legitimate investments that couldn't be traced back to violence. Sara found him in his office at dawn, the same room where she'd overheard Sterling's confession all those weeks ago. He was burning papers in the fireplace, feeding decades of criminal enterprise into flames one document at a time. The ledgers, she asked from the doorway. All of them, Atlas confirmed. Every record. Every route. Every name. He watched another page curl and blacken. By noon, Atlas Robinson the crime lord will cease to exist. Sara stepped into the room. And who will you be instead? He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain. Almost vulnerable. I don't know, he admitted. I've been this person since I was 19. Since Elena died and my father told me emotion was weakness. I learned to be cold, calculated, the kind of man people feared too much to betray. He fed another page to the fire. I'm good at it. Being the monster. You're not a monster, Sara said quietly. I've killed people, Sara. Ordered deaths. Built an empire on fear and blood. You also took in a stranger your enemies sent you as a sacrifice, she countered. You fired a designer for being cruel. You taught me that my existence doesn't require an apology. Monsters don't do that. Atlas was silent for a long moment, watching the flames consume his past. The Syndicate Council sent word this morning, he said finally. They want me to take over the eastern seaboard. Full control. They're impressed with how I handled the Shadow Route situation. What did you tell them? I told them no. He turned from the fire to face her fully. I told them I was done. That I'd transfer my operations to Marco and Vincent, that all outstanding debts were settled, and that as of today, I'm retiring. Sara's breath caught. You're leaving. We're leaving, he corrected. If you want to. The words hung in the air between them. I have nothing for you, Sara, Atlas continued, his voice raw in a way she'd never heard. No empire. No power. Just money I earned legitimately and a house in the mountains that nobody knows about. I'm offering you a life of obscurity with a man who's trying to figure out how to be human again. He stepped closer, and Sara saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear that she'd choose differently. You could stay here, he said. The estate is yours if you want it. Or take your share of the recovered money and start fresh anywhere in the world. You're free, Sara. Actually free. You don't owe me anything. Sara thought about the girl who'd stood in this house 7 weeks ago, shaking and certain she was about to die. The girl who'd learned that her family paid for her murder. The girl who'd discovered she had a genius for finding patterns in chaos. She thought about Atlas holding her face while she cried. About him kneeling in front of her after she broke his grandmother's teapot. About the way he'd looked at Madame Vane when she tried to make Sara feel small. She thought about 37 names written in ink on his skin, and the fact that he'd refused to add hers to that list. I spent my whole life being told I was too much, Sara said slowly. Too big. Too visible. Too expensive. Too difficult. And then I met you, and you looked at me and saw exactly enough. Atlas's jaw tightened. Sara. I don't want the estate, she interrupted. I don't want to start fresh somewhere alone. I want the house in the mountains. I want obscurity. I want to sit in a library with someone who thinks my existence doesn't need justification. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. I want you, Atlas. Not the crime lord. Not the feared king. Just the man who taught me that surviving is its own kind of strength. Something broke in his expression. Relief. Joy. The kind of raw emotion he'd spent years learning to suppress. He reached up, cupping her face the way he'd done so many times before, and Sara realized this gesture was his language. His way of saying you matter when words felt inadequate. I don't know how to be soft, he said quietly. I don't know how to be normal. Good, Sara said. I don't know how to be small. We'll figure it out together. Atlas smiled then, genuine and unguarded, and Sara realized she'd never actually seen him smile before. Not really. The mountains it is, he said. They left the estate at sunrise the next morning. No fanfare. No announcements. Just two people in a car heading toward a life where their worth wasn't measured by power or appearance but by the simple choice to stand beside each other. Behind them, the criminal empire burned to ash. Ahead, the mountains waited. And Sara Douglas, the girl who was supposed to disappear, finally learned what it meant to be visible on her own terms. Real power, she discovered, wasn't about controlling others. It was about choosing yourself. And choosing someone who chose you back. Sara's story reminds us that our worth isn't determined by others' cruelty. If this resonated with you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe for more stories about people who refuse to be erased. Your engagement helps these stories reach people who need them most. What's one thing you'd tell Sara if you could? Drop it in the comments below.